Try boiling water without a pot and you'll give up in 5 minutes. But they did it every day. Without metal, without a potter's wheel, without the utensils we are accustomed to, the indigenous peoples of America created culinary masterpieces using only what nature provided them. Their kitchen was an open-air laboratory where the main tools were fire, stone, and incredible ingenuity. This is a story about how ingenious solutions, honed over millennia, made it possible to cook the most complex dishes in conditions that seem impossible to us. People turned bison stomachs into cauldrons and forest pits into modern ovens with a steamer function. Their methods were so effective that they not only fed their families, but also prepared food for long and harsh winters. Watch the video to the end to find out how to cook soup in a bark basket without burning it, and what secret ingredient turned an ordinary pit into the perfect oven for hours of slow cooking. I will reveal the best-kept secret. For indigenous peoples, the kitchen was not a room in the house. The entire land surrounding them was one large kitchen and pantry. Every element of the landscape had its purpose and was part of a unified system of life support. The forest, prairie, or river valley provided not only food, but also all the necessary tools for its preparation. The right kind of stone could become a knife, a scraper, or a kettle. A flexible branch turned into a skewer, and sturdy bark into a spacious pot. This worldview required a deep knowledge of geology, botany, and physics. People knew exactly which stones would glow red hot but not crack in water, and which wood would burn long and hot without emitting harmful smoke. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation as the greatest treasure. The choice of a place for a camp was often determined precisely by the availability of these kitchen resources. Proximity to a source of suitable clay, outcrops of the necessary rock types, or thickets of certain types of trees were no less important than the availability of game or water. Nature was their universal supermarket and tool store. They did not take more than they needed from nature and used every gift with maximum efficiency. Animal bones became tools, skins became clothing and dishes, and even the stomach contents of herbivorous animals could be used for food. It was a philosophy of zero waste, dictated by respect for the world. This approach shaped a completely different attitude towards food and its preparation. It was not just a mundane process, but a sacred ritual full of rituals and gratitude. Every successful meal was the result of harmonious cooperation between man and nature. The process of cooking began long before the fire was lit. It began with finding and gathering the right materials. It was slow, meditative work that required observation and patience. They saw a potential kettle in an ordinary river boulder and a future pot in a birch tree. The world around them was not a collection of random objects. It was a complete set of ready-made solutions for any task in life. Modern man, finding himself in the wild, sees only chaos. The indigenous people saw perfect order and abundance in the same place. This fundamental difference in perception is the key to understanding their ingenious cooking. I would be very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think modern humanity has lost this deep connection with nature and the ability to see it not only as a resource, but also as a partner? Write about it in the comments. What if I told you that you can boil water without any cookware that can withstand fire? The method of boiling with hot stones was one of the most common and ingenious solutions to this problem. It allowed liquid food to be cooked in any container that could hold water. The essence of the method was simple, but it required skill and the right materials. First, smooth, dense stones the size of a fist were heated red hot in a large fire. It was very important to choose the right types of rock, granite or basalt, which did not crack or explode from sudden temperature changes. While the stones were heating up, a container for cooking was prepared. This could be a vat hollowed out of wood, a dense basket made of roots, or even a pit in the ground lined with animal skin. The main condition was that the container had to be waterproof. When the stones reached the right temperature, they were removed from the fire with special wooden tongs. Then they were quickly cleaned of ash and lowered one by one into a container with water and food. The water around the stone instantly boiled, transferring heat to the entire volume of liquid. As the stones cooled, they were removed and replaced with new hot ones. This continuous cycle allowed the food to boil constantly and cook thoroughly. This method was used to cook soups, stews, and porridges, as well as to soften tough meat and roots. This method was incredibly effective and allowed for precise temperature control. By adding or removing stones, it was possible to regulate the intensity of the boiling. It was a kind of ancient analog of the modern kitchen stove. In addition, the minerals contained in the stones enriched the food, making it more nutritious. The ash that fell into the water along with the stones acted as a seasoning, giving the dish a unique, smoky aroma. It was a form of cooking full of subtle nuances. Thus, without a single metal object, people solved the most complex culinary task. But what if I told you that it was possible to do without a water container, turning the earth itself into a giant steamer? In the next chapter, you will learn how the underground kitchen worked. What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries. Just kidding. But this method really does seem like magic. The underground oven, or earthen baking pit, was one of the most sophisticated and unique culinary inventions. It allowed large quantities of food to be cooked, making even the toughest meat incredibly tender and juicy. It was not just a pit, but a complex engineering structure. First, a depression was dug in the ground, the size of which depended on the amount of food. The bottom and walls of the pit were carefully lined with large stones. Then a large hot fire was lit inside this stone bowl. It was kept burning for several hours until the stones were red hot. They gave off such intense heat that it was almost impossible to stand near them. When the stones reached their peak temperature, the coals and ashes were carefully removed from the pit. A thick layer of fresh, succulent vegetation, burdock leaves, wild onions, ferns, or even wet seaweed, was laid on the hot bottom. This layer served as protection from direct heat and a source of steam. Food was placed on this green cushion, whole pieces of meat, fish, tubers, and roots. Then the food was covered with another thick layer of succulent leaves. The result was a kind of airtight green cocoon. The entire structure was then covered with earth that had been previously removed from the pit. The layer of earth completely blocked the air and created a thermos effect. The heat from the hot stones and the steam from the moist greens remained inside. In such an underground oven, the food was not fried, but slowly simmered in its own juice and aromatic steam. The process could take from several hours to a whole day. It was an ancient analog of the modern technology of slow cooking. The earth oven is the quintessence of the culinary wisdom of indigenous peoples. It combined the principles of baking, steaming, and smoking. It was a real multicooker, gifted by nature itself. Are you ready for the shocking truth? For the nomadic peoples of the Great Plains, who constantly moved in pursuit of bison herds, it was impossible to carry heavy wooden or clay dishes with them. They found an ingenious solution by turning parts of the hunted animal into temporary but very effective kitchen utensils. One of the most amazing devices was a pot made from a fresh bison hide or stomach. After cutting up the carcass, a small hole was dug in the ground. This hole served as the frame for the future pot. The pit was carefully lined with the animal's skin, with the wool facing outwards. The edges of the skin were secured to the ground with wooden pegs. The result was a sturdy and completely waterproof container. Water was poured into this improvised cauldron, and pieces of meat, wild roots, and herbs were added. Then the familiar method of boiling with hot stones was used. Stone by stone, the contents of the cauldron began to bubble, turning into a rich soup. This method was the height of practicality. It did not require any special utensils. Everything necessary was provided by the freshly caught game. After cooking, the skin could be removed and sent for further processing to make clothing or coverings for teepees. In addition, cooking food directly at the hunting site saved energy. There was no need to carry heavy pieces of meat back to camp. It was possible to cook, eat, and restore energy right in the field. Of course, such dishes were disposable, but for a nomadic lifestyle, it was the perfect solution. Nature provided a new picnic set every time. This technology demonstrates incredible adaptability and a lack of stereotypes in thinking. Who else could have thought of cooking soup in a pit lined with animal skin? But even that was not the limit of ingenuity. In the next chapter, you will learn how it was possible to cook in paper dishes. The peoples who lived in forest areas, such as the Iroquois, made masterful use of their region's main resource, trees. One of the most remarkable materials was birch bark. It was used to make lightweight, durable, and most remarkably, waterproof dishes. The bark was removed from the tree in large strips at a certain time of year when it was most flexible. Then from this single piece of bark, like a sheet of paper, they folded a box or basket of the desired shape. The corners were bent and sewn together with spruce or willow roots. The most important part was ensuring that the container was watertight. All seams and joints were carefully coated with boiling resin from coniferous trees. After hardening, the resin created a completely waterproof layer. The result was a container that was light as a feather, but strong enough to carry and store water. But the most incredible thing was that you could cook hot food in this birch bark container. Of course, you couldn't put it directly on the fire. It would burn instantly. The secret again lay in the method of heated stones. Water was poured into the birch bark container, food was placed inside, and then stones heated in a fire were lowered into it. The birch bark withstood the temperature of boiling water, as the water itself constantly cooled the walls, preventing them from catching fire. It seems like a miracle, but it obeys the simple laws of physics. The boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius, while the ignition temperature of wood is much higher. As long as there was water in the container, it prevented the walls from heating up to a critical point. In addition to birch bark, other materials were also used to make dishes. Craftsmen wove baskets from roots and grasses so tightly that they could hold water. Sometimes they were additionally coated with clay for greater strength and tightness. Such tableware was ideal for a forest lifestyle. It was lightweight and could be made on the spot from readily available materials. If it broke, it was not a pity to leave it behind, because a new one could be made at any time. This ability to create complex objects from the simplest natural materials is truly amazing. It required not only manual dexterity, but also a deep understanding of the properties of each plant. It was the cutting-edge technology of its time. Birch bark dishes were not just utilitarian objects. They were often decorated with intricate patterns, turning them into works of art. They were a symbol of harmony between man and the forest, which provided him with everything he needed to live. What if I showed you a time machine and we traveled back thousands of years? The most ancient and simplest way of cooking food was, of course, baking it directly over a fire. However, even here there were many tricks and techniques that turned this process into a real art. The most obvious method was to thread pieces of meat or fish onto a green branch and roast them over the coals. The secret was in choosing the right branch. It had to be from a non-poisonous tree, strong enough to support the weight of the food, and moist enough not to burn prematurely. For larger pieces of meat or whole carcasses, a spit was constructed. 2 poles were stuck into the ground on either side of the fire, and a thick, straight stick was placed on top of them, onto which the game was skewered. By turning the spit, the meat was cooked evenly on all sides. Another interesting method was baking in clay. Whole fish or birds, without removing the scales or feathers, were coated with a thick layer of wet clay. Then this clay, cocoon, was buried in the hot coals of the fire. The clay baked, turning into a hard ceramic mold. Inside this mold, the product simmered in its own juices, as if in an oven. When the clay was ready, it was broken open, and the scales or feathers stuck to it were easily removed along with the clay crust, leaving clean and juicy meat. Baking in ashes was also practiced. Large tubers, such as wild potatoes or Jerusalem artichokes, were simply buried in hot ashes at the edge of the fire. The ashes provided even heating and prevented the product from burning. Large flat stones were used to make flatbread and bread. The stone was heated in a fire, then cleaned of ashes, and dough was placed on its hot surface. The result was a kind of frying pan on which bread could be quickly baked. These seemingly primitive methods required a great deal of experience. It was necessary to feel the heat of the fire, know the exact cooking time, and understand how different foods behave when heated. It was intuitive cooking of the highest level. It allowed food to be prepared with a minimum set of tools, which was ideal for hunters or warriors on the march. All that was needed was fire, a knife, and knowledge of the secrets of nature. Nothing superfluous, just pure function and result. The simplicity of these methods is deceptive. Behind it lie thousands of years of experimentation and observation. Every nuance, from the choice of firewood to the height of the spit above the coals, has been tested and refined to perfection. How much do you think the taste of meat cooked over an open fire differs from what we cook in modern kitchens? While you ponder this, in the next chapter, we will learn how to preserve the abundance of summer for the whole winter without a refrigerator. Providing yourself with food for a day is one thing, but preserving surplus meat, fish, and plants for the long winter months is a task of a completely different level of complexity. Indigenous peoples developed highly effective preservation methods that allowed them to survive the harshest times. The basis of these methods was drying. Bison or deer meat was cut into thin, long strips. These strips were hung on special wooden racks in the open sun and wind. In the dry climate of the Great Plains, the meat dried in a few days, turning into a hard, light, and very nutritious product. In this form, it could be stored for months without spoiling. It was the perfect supply for long journeys and in case of unsuccessful hunting. To make pemmican, an energy concentrate for nomads, the dried meat was ground into powder using stones. This powder was then mixed with melted animal fat and dried berries. The resulting mixture was tightly packed into leather bags, where it could be stored for years. In more humid regions, where simple drying in the sun was ineffective, smoking was used. Fish or meat was hung in special huts or simply over a slowly smoldering fire. The smoke not only dried the product, but also impregnated it with preservatives, repelling insects. Smoking also gave the food a unique aroma and taste. Different types of wood gave different flavors. It was a whole science that allowed people to diversify their diet. Plants were also actively harvested for future use. Berries, mushrooms, and edible herbs were dried in the sun or in the shade. Roots and tubers were often stored in special pits dug in dry soil below the frost line. Grain crops, such as corn, were carefully dried after harvesting. The grains were then stored in large woven baskets coated with clay, which protected the supplies from moisture and rodents. These were real granaries. These methods made it possible to create a reliable food supply. They ensured the survival of the community during periods of famine and gave confidence in the future. The ability to preserve food was valued no less than the ability to obtain it. All these preservation methods are based on simple physical principles, removing moisture and creating an environment unsuitable for bacterial growth. Indigenous peoples discovered these principles empirically thousands of years before the advent of modern science. Their knowledge was their main survival technology. Although many peoples managed without ceramic dishes, their appearance in some cultures was a real technological revolution. The ability to make clay pots that could be placed directly on the fire radically changed culinary possibilities. This ushered in the era of soups, porridges, and stews as we know them today. The manufacturing process was laborious and required great skill. First, it was necessary to find suitable clay, plastic, without unnecessary impurities. Then the clay was thoroughly kneaded, adding fillers for strength, sand, crushed shells, or shamat. The pots were molded by hand, without the use of a potter's wheel. The most common method was the coil method. The master rolled long sausages out of clay and laid them in a spiral on top of each other, forming the walls of the vessel. The walls were carefully smoothed inside and out with smooth stones or pieces of leather. The strength of the future pot depended on the uniformity of the wall thickness. It was painstaking work that required a steady hand and a keen eye. The finished vessels were dried in the shade for several days. Drying too quickly in the sun could cause cracks to appear. Only after they were completely dry were the pots ready for the most important stage, firing. Firing was carried out in open pits or simply in a large bonfire. The pots were surrounded by firewood on all sides and kept burning for several hours. The firing temperature was relatively low, but it was enough to turn the clay into strong, porous ceramics. These pots had a rounded or conical bottom. This shape was ideal for placing in a hearth between stones. It ensured even heating and stability. The advent of ceramics made it possible to cook food in new ways. Pots could be used to cook tough meat and beans for long periods of time, extract fat from bones, and prepare complex soups with many ingredients. This greatly diversified the diet. Clay pots were also used to store water and bulk foods. Their porous structure allowed water to evaporate slowly, keeping the contents cool. It was a kind of ancient refrigerator. Despite all its advantages, pottery also had disadvantages. It was heavy and fragile, which made it inconvenient for nomadic peoples. That is why many tribes, especially in the Great Plains, preferred lighter and more mobile containers made of leather and bark until the very end. In addition to boiling, hot stones were also used for another important culinary process: frying. A large flat stone heated in a fire became an excellent frying pan or griddle. This method was ideal for quickly cooking small portions of food. Not all stones were suitable for this purpose. A flat slate, sandstone, or other stone with a smooth surface was needed. It was placed in the fire or on coals and allowed to heat thoroughly. When the stone was hot, it was removed from the fire, cleaned of ash, and greased with animal fat. Food was placed on this improvised hot surface. This could be thin slices of meat, fish, or corn or acorn flour cakes. The food was quickly fried on both sides, covered with an appetizing crust. The stone retained heat for a long time, allowing several servings to be cooked in a row. This method did not require any utensils and was very economical. Such a stone frying pan provided pure heat. The food did not come into contact with open fire and was not saturated with smoke, retaining its natural taste. It was a healthier alternative to spit roasting. This method was especially popular among peoples living on the coast or near rivers. It was convenient to cook fish, shellfish, and other seafood on hot stones. It allowed the delicate texture of seafood to be preserved. Bread was also baked on stones. Dough was made from ground grains, nuts, or acorns, formed into thin cakes, and baked on a hot surface. The result was nutritious and crispy bread, which was an important part of the diet. Even today, echoes of this technology can be found in some national cuisines around the world. Cooking on stones is still considered a delicacy. This proves that ancient methods can be not only effective, but also exquisite. Native American cooking techniques were not just a set of ways to obtain calories. They were an integral part of their culture, social life, and spiritual beliefs. Cooking and eating together were acts full of deep meaning. Many methods, such as using an earth oven or boiling stones in a large pot, required a collective effort. This brought the community together and strengthened social bonds. People worked together and then shared the fruits of their labor. Food was never taken for granted. It was considered a sacred gift from the Creator and nature. Each meal began and ended with words of gratitude to the spirits of the animals and plants that gave themselves as food to humans. There was a strict rule: share food with everyone. A hunter who brought back prey did not consider it his personal property. Meat was distributed throughout the camp, first and foremost to the elderly, widows, and orphans. This approach ensured that no one in the community went hungry. It was an effective social protection system based not on laws but on moral principles. Generosity and hospitality were considered the highest virtues. Cooking was also a way of passing on knowledge. Older women taught young girls all the intricacies of the culinary arts. They passed on not only recipes, but also the stories, songs, and rituals associated with them. Thus, the cuisine of indigenous peoples was the heart of their culture. It was a place where practical survival skills, social norms, and deep spirituality intertwined. It was a philosophy of life expressed through food. By studying their culinary methods, we discover more than just forgotten recipes. We touch upon a holistic and harmonious worldview in which humans are not masters of nature, but only one of its many parts. And this, perhaps, is the main lesson of their amazing cuisine. We have seen that the absence of metal pots and pans was not an obstacle to the creation of a complex and diverse culinary culture. On the contrary, it stimulated incredible ingenuity. The indigenous peoples of America turned nature itself into their kitchen, using stones, earth, plants, and animal parts as universal tools. From boiling water in a pit lined with animal skin to slowly simmering meat in an underground oven, each method was perfectly adapted to the environment and way of life. It was both a science and an art, based on thousands of years of observation and a deep respect for the world. These technologies prove that human genius can find elegant solutions to any problem using only what is at hand. What other aspects of the daily life and crafts of the indigenous peoples of America would you like to see in future videos? Suggest your topics in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the wisdom of ancient cultures.